What's going on, everyone? Captain Cope here, and the topic for today's video is twinking. And if you thought that we were going to be talking about skinny gay guys, sorry to disappoint you. We're talking about twinking in the gaming sense. If that's what you clicked on the video for, I'm sorry to mislead you, but make sure you subscribe, because next week's video is going to be top 10 twinks of Soulsborne. Number 1 may surprise you. In case you don't know what it is, twinking is the act of getting higher level gear onto a lower level character, whether by having it drop for you, or in the case of Elden Ring or Dark Souls, running to a further part of the game without leveling up to acquire higher level gear, and you come back to lower levels to use it. Typically for PvP, it's usually something that is associated with invaders, but hosts are just as guilty. They often get high level weapons dropped for them. I'd also argue that another form of twinking, arguably worse than having the gear dropped for you, is password summoned overlevled phantoms, because not only do they take their high level gear with them, they also take their stats with them, and I'll touch more on that later. Quick side note, all the background footage today is on a level 30 character. This character is certainly twinked out, twinked up. I went as far as completing Ronnie's questline with this character, which was a lot of fun. That's a good little challenge. And I have all 4 talisman slots. I usually use the fashion ring on the 4th one, just kind of flex, but I do have that extra talisman slot if I need to get sweaty for the overlevels. And keep in mind, this is a pre-DLC world, so if you're doing low level invasions now, you gotta deal with all that new DLC bullshit. And just pay attention to the amount of high level phantoms I'm fighting, and the amount of rivers of blood hosts that we're gonna see. This is why I'm gonna say that you're kind of putting yourself at a big disadvantage if you're being an honest invader and not twinking. The first time I heard the term twinking, it was in reference to Dark Souls, and it even predates Dark Souls. It goes all the way back to Demon Souls, and the term even predates Demon Souls because I was curious where this term even came from, so I looked it up, and apparently it started as an MMO term. So the way this term came to be in the MMO world is the twink is the person getting the gear dropped for them. They're a low-level player, they get this gear that should be otherwise unobtainable for them, dropped to them from a higher level player. So now you have this unsuspecting twink, who's really a sleeper build now, because he has some high-level gear. The definitions I read also made it sound kind of like a sugar daddy, sugar baby situation. The little itty-bitty twink, he's a sugar baby, and he's getting this undeserving gear from his sugar daddy, the high-level player. So there you go, little history lesson for you. I've heard this term for so long, but never bothered to look up how it came to be. I still wish the community could have come up with a slightly less homoerotic term for it, but I digress. Also, by this definition, you could very easily make the argument that it's not twinking if you go get the gear yourself, which is certainly my preferred method. I like the challenge of being under-leveled for the PvE and grabbing that gear myself instead of just getting it dropped for me. I like to earn it. Many people would consider twinking cheating or an exploit, but it's been in this series for so long, and Fromsoftware has been fully aware of this problem that at this point I'm willing to argue it's an intended mechanic. Fromsoftware has demonstrated that they are fully aware of this phenomenon because over the series, just Souls games in general, over their lifetime, Fromsoftware has taken many measurements to combat this. Starting out with Demon Souls, that shit was just the Wild West. If you want to be an evil motherfucker, Demon Souls is your game. You could break people's armor in this game. You could even steal their levels with a certain spell. There was no kind of weapon upgrade based matchmaking in Demon Souls, meaning that you could fully upgrade a weapon and then come back to the start of the game to invade someone with an unupgraded weapon. There was still level based matchmaking though. That has always been a thing in these titles. People twinking on their characters has kind of led to this misconception where people say, oh, I've been invaded by a high-level character. I've been invaded by, someone who's at endgame and they came back to Limgrave to invade me. That's not the case, it's just their gear. There's always been level-based matchmaking. There has not always been gear-based matchmaking, though. The way it works in Elden Ring is that you have to be... It's different for every weapon level range, but basically you have to be within a certain amount of upgrade levels with a weapon. You can't fully upgrade a weapon and then invade someone at level 1 with a plus 25 weapon. You have to be within 3 to 5 stone upgrades. There's a whole formula, it's a little bit different for every game, and this wasn't implemented until Dark Souls 3. Invading someone who's at low level with a fully upgraded weapon is a huge advantage. In the case of the original Dark Souls, you could even upgrade your armor, so you could essentially just make yourself an unkillable monster and invade someone at the start of the game. And with solo invasions, what is a poor noob to do? You know, you're struggling with the PvE to begin with, and someone's coming in with fully upgraded armor, fully upgraded weapons. You got no chance. I believe in the remaster of Dark Souls, they did add some kind of weapon level matchmaking. Dark Souls 2 was the first game that Fromsoftware took a serious crack at trying to combat the twinking problem. That's when they introduced the controversial soul memory. And the way soul memory worked was your matchmaking was based off of the amount of souls that you've held total throughout your playthrough. Your level didn't matter, it only mattered how many souls you have collected total. So I understand the philosophy behind this. It was so that, you know, you can't go run through the whole game, collect a bunch of souls, spend it on upgrades, upgrading weapons, and then you've ran through the whole game, you've collected millions of souls, you can come back and invade someone who's new. It arguably made the twinking problem much worse though, because someone who's new at the game and bad at the game, you're going to be collecting a lot of souls, dying with them, losing them, they're spending them on, you know, life gems or just other consumables, they're spending them on spells or other items they don't know what do. Meanwhile, someone who has an invasion character, they are not wasting a single soul, so they're going to have a much more optimized character and still give themselves a huge advantage. Bloodborne comes along, and twinking is still arguably a huge problem, especially with the blood gems. You know, you can go get a blood gem that gives you, you know, 25% damage boost, slap on 3 of those, fully upgrade your weapon, and invade someone who's new. But what Bloodborne did was you can only be invaded from level, I believe it's like 34 onwards, and you can only be invaded in certain areas. Bloodborne was also the first game to introduce the password matchmaking system that we currently have in Elden Ring, and I would argue that this is kind of where like the arms race begins for twinking. I call it an arms race because you can be at the beginning of the game and you can summon someone who's, you know, new game +7, they're hundreds of levels higher than the person they've been summoned by and who they would be getting invaded by. You know, they have maxed out weapons, and the thing with the password system that has remained through Dark Souls 3 and through Elden Ring is that the password, they're quote-unquote scaled down. Yes, they're not at their full power, but the scaling is very poor. They can still have a fully upgraded weapon, which is going to deal much more stamina damage. It'll break your guard much easier. They have access to many more spells. You know, they can just endlessly spam FP. So the thing is, if you want to be an honest invader, this is a very difficult thing to deal with. Let's say you're invading in Limgrave, you're level 20, and you're being honest, you've only collected what you found in Limgrave, you only have 1 talisman slot, and how are you supposed to fight someone who's level 500? They got 4 talisman slots, they got an FP bar that goes all the way across their screen, their resistances are crazy high. You honestly can't deal with this with a true, honest, low-level invasion character. And as someone who likes to invade at low levels, you know, I don't do this to grief other players, I don't do this for easy wins. It is fun to go and invade in places like Stormvale Castle or in Raya Lucaria. There's a lot of really fun places to invade at lower levels, and you're honestly a lot less likely to run fog walls like you do at some of the higher levels where people are only summoning to go fight the bosses. So to give yourself some sort of fighting chance against these high-level players, if you really do want to be able to beat them, yeah, sure, you could outplay them, but they're going to have more flasks than you, they're going to have better heals, they're going to have access to all the talisman slots, and just a bigger variety of weapons. And if you're being an honest invader, there's not much you can do about this. Unless you're just absolutely cracked out of the game and you're able to whittle them down. So going back to the implementations that Fromsoftware has done to try to stop twinking or combat it, because I don't think they have any intentions of stopping it. Dark Souls 3's invasion matchmaking and password system and everything is essentially the same that we have in Elden Ring. You know, just did have a higher player limit, but other than that, it's basically the same. By player limit, I just mean amount of players that can be in the world. So if Fromsoftware really wanted to put a stop to twinking, they absolutely could. They could just do a equipment-based matchmaking where if you have later game equipment on the host, you can't invade them. Though with a game like Elden Ring, this would be very hard to enforce because it's hard to argue, you know, what's the intended path. It'd also probably just severely limit the amount of people you could invade, but it would be a very easy way for them to stop the phenomenon of twinking if they wanted to. I do think the scaling of the phantoms in Bloodborne, Dark Souls, and Elden Ring is very intentional. The fact that it doesn't scale them down very good, I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think number one, it's just to get people through the game easier. You know, people who are struggling and do have a buddy who wants to help them in a higher level, they can just kind of breeze through the game. It's basically a built-in easy mode. It also combats twinking in a way. You know, if someone comes in and they have high level gear, you have your high level buddy with you, it's really not as much of an issue. So as an invader, the ability to twink is kind of like the one bone that Fromsoftware throws us. We're nerfed in so many ways in invasions. Flasks are halved. You're always invading someone who's higher level. At best, they're the same level as you. You're outnumbered. So being able to go and make a more powerful character than the person you're invading can level that playing field a little bit. The fact that they could so easily remove it from the game or put a stop to it, I'm going to argue it's intended. But with how many overleveled phantoms you run into, you know, you just got to give yourself a fighting chance. And when it comes to twinking, personally, I don't like to go super hard on honest players. You know, I'm not going to pull out like a rot rapier or, I don't know, something else fucked up, or some fucked up status effect on some very clearly what are new players. You know, because I would love if I only ran into honest players and could just have a fun low level fight, you know, without all the crazy spells, high damage. But unfortunately, it's not the reality. You just have so many overleveled phantoms that throw off the balance, so you got to bring some heat for them. If you want to take some really powerful items and just crush low level players, you know, that's fine, that's on you. It does get boring pretty quickly, just running through Limgrave with double bleed spears or something and just melting players. It gets kind of old, and once you actually develop some skill in PvP, you're not going to find any joy in that. I just like to keep the nasty stuff for when I run into those overleveled phantoms. And in Elden Ring, I really don't think the twinking problem is as big as a lot of people make it out to be, at least in terms of weapons. You know, some of the strongest stuff you can get is right at the start of the game in Limgrave. You can even spawn with an S-stock. You know, you could have a heavy thrusting sword or an S-stock with quick step within like the first 10 minutes of the game, which is arguably one of the strongest setups. You could pick up a Zweihander in Limgrave. You can get Carrion Slicer in Limgrave. A lot of the strongest stuff is just right at the start of the game, so you're not giving yourself the hugest advantage by going later into the game to pick up other weapons. It's really just making the game more interesting for yourself, adding a little variety to your build. What is very strong though is getting yourself all the talisman slots, and I do typically do that just because I like to give myself a fighting chance against these overleveled phantoms. It also gives you a lot more options with what you're actually able to do with your build. You know, it's fun to see what you can actually make work when there's so many stat boosting talismans. Honestly, these stat boosting talismans are only significant at low levels. You know, like the Sore Seals, they're really not worth it once you're at high level. And if that isn't just Fromsoftware throwing invaders a bone, I don't know what is. It's like, it's the perfect thing to twink with. It's gotta be meant for us, right? And also, plus like the, you know, the +5 strength talisman, +5 magic talisman. Once you're at a higher level, it's like, who really gives a shit? But when you're a low level character, it's really significant. Consumables are also crazy strong at low levels because a lot of them just do flat damage, or you can come in with something like Rot when a player has no way to combat it. Personally, I don't see the fun in that, but if you want to do it, morally I don't see anything wrong with it. You're just killing someone in a video game. It's not that deep. Overall, I got no problem with twinking. I do think it's a little lame, personally, to get all this shit dropped for you. You know, to an extent, I get it if you just want to get a character up and going pretty quickly, have someone mule it for you. Getting stuff muled to you strictly for the purpose of being able to stomp low-level players, you know, not my thing. I think it's a little lame, personally. But it's your game, you know, play it how you want to. I think you should have to earn it. I like the challenge of running deep into the game, seeing how much stuff you can gather for a low level invasion character. It's a good challenge because you can't upgrade your weapons too much if you're trying to stay within a certain invasion bracket. I'm not someone who ever would really attempt a challenge run, but I've ended up doing a couple like pseudo challenge runs just to be able to get stuff for invasion characters. So I think that's a lot of fun, and just getting everything dropped for you, you're kind of missing out on that experience. So it's a fun way to do a playthrough. Gets you to challenge yourself a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if Fromsoftware does anything about twinking in future titles. I don't think it'll be something you can really do in Duskbloods, but in an extra traditional Souls title as we know it, it'll be interesting to see if anything's done about it. I kind of suspect that the current system we have, where there are overleveled phantoms, there's weapon matchmaking, and there's level matchmaking, will stay. And honestly, I think it should stay in these games as long as overleveled phantoms remain a thing. If the ability to twink is removed, they better get rid of overleveled phantoms as well, because it's kind of the only tool there is to combat it. Honestly, what I'd much prefer to see is that you can only password summon people who are a similar level to you, or really actually make the downscaling work, so that you could actually beat an overleveled phantom with an honest low-level invasion character, and make it so that you can't drop items for people. I would be fine with all that going away if it really meant that we could just have some good old-fashioned low-level invasion fun, and like honest too. But yeah, twinking, it's basically a time-honored tradition at this point. It's probably here to stay. I think what I want is kind of a fantasy. Yeah, this video ended up being much more long-winded than I anticipated, but if you listened to the end, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll catch you next time.